collected for our project and put it in the paper.
Oh, so this is by the time we use all that.
Yes.
The whole switch is well,
Why is it not 4 options? You have to put them all.
you don't have you only have to do all both of them.
If you want to use those three, which ones we're not using it, so.
He shakes it.
I mean, at least they're not using it. So,
The other one's set up.
yeah. I had to swap 3 boards. I found the big boys on which work. The one that I use in the classroom. Alright, we're gonna go get class started. Man, it's like the fastest y'all have ever quieted down. So tonight, I'll let them talk about their topic and whatnot. I'm going to dig into it, but first, I don't know if there are any announcements necessarily. This, Sunday we'll have class again, and then we'll start our coffee back on Monday. We're gonna be in Romans 9 if you want to go ahead and read. But what I do need to talk about this. If you've been here on the past few Sundays, maybe not spring break, but some Sundays before that, you might have noticed that there is a guy who would come and sit in the back of the college class and eat a lot of snacks and then go into worship, and his name was Daryl. And so some of you met Daryl, and if you did, I appreciate that, truly. But he is friends with David, and he had been kind of coming with David. Well, he just got diagnosed with stage 2 cancer, lung cancer, and he called the office yesterday and said he's going to South Atlanta today, and he's going to get a diagnosis, and he's going to let David know what the diagnosis was Friday or something like that. But anyways, and so he called and asked. He said he needed a haircut, and he said he looked terrible. He needed a haircut, and he didn't want to walk to the haircut place. And so we went and picked him up and sang Al Green together, and we talked about it. And he said that he wanted us to. Yeah, I said Al Green. I said that he asked for us to specifically pray tonight about this, because I had said we've been praying for you, whatever, and he said on Wednesday when you get together for class, could y'all all pray about it? I was like, oh yeah, for sure. So anyways, so here we are, and so we'll pray about it together. And if you met him, then you can kind of picture who we're talking about. And if not, then just know that this is a guy who doesn't have a home in Montgomery, who has been coming around and getting to know some of us. And so, anyways, so we'll pray about that. But if you happen to see him come back by next time, make sure to, or at some point, then make sure to go meet him and say hey to him. We're trying to, in times like this, time is urgent, and so we are trying to talk as much as we can about God to him. And so, anyways, so we'll pray about it together, and then we'll start class. Father, we thank you for today, and we thank you for the opportunities that you've blessed us with, especially this opportunity right now to be together, and the encouragement that we can derive from each other in the time that we have to study your word. Right now, we're mindful of Mr. Darrell and the diagnosis that he just got with cancer. We ask that that you be with him with this news and with this condition, this cancer that he has, and we ask that you heal him and that you prolong his life and allow him to have time, specifically time to be open to the gospel. We ask that you be with him and help him to be open and receptive to your word, and with those who are talking to him about it and teaching him, help them to have courage and to take advantage of the time that they have. But most importantly, we just are mindful of both his physical and his spiritual condition, and we want to see him accept the gospel and to obey it one day. And so allow his heart and his mind to be open, and for there to be opportunities for us to teach him and to work with him. And if he's back here, help us to encourage him and put our arms around him, and to be the best influences on him that we can be. We thank you for the God that you are and all that you do for us, and for us, the avenue of prayer that we had to even be able to come to you and to ask you for things like this. We ask that you be with us each day and help us to be searching for opportunities to talk to others about you, just like we're praying about with Daryl. And it's in your son's name that we pray. Amen.
All right, so our topic tonight, you've got your handout. If you didn't get a handout, Nate will give you one. We're looking at abortion and contraception. So we're going to actually do this over 2 weeks, at least John is, so he'll have some other folks coming here. So my goal tonight is just stir up stuff.
I may just let David and Mark handle it.
Yeah, that'd be fun. We'll just swap out with them. So, because this is an extensive topic, and there's a lot of little pieces to discuss and get together on it, so you can see the fuller picture. So that's what we're going to try and initiate tonight, is get a lay of the land, lay some foundational concepts and principles, pull in some biblical verses as well. But like I said, we're looking at both abortion and contraception. I think these are related because of you're dealing with the beginning of life and how life comes about. Go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 1. Everything's got to go back to Genesis, if y'all didn't know. So Genesis 1.
It is the beginning.
It is the beginning. And I want somebody to read verses 26. You just do 26 through 28.
Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth."
All right, so this is our precedent for understanding humanity, understanding how humans are created, their purpose, their function. From being made in the image of God, you get gender, with they're created male and female. You get a theological concept behind it, that being made in the image of God, being these image bearers and how you interact with one another, but also you get the principle of marriage and that we're to be fruitful and multiply. So that is part of what we get to enjoy and be a part of, is that God has tasked us with, in a sense, being a part of the creation process, and the fact that we get to bring about life. Now, his hand is certainly involved, and we'll see some verses that highlight that even further, but he has given us the responsibility to come together and to participate in that. So as we look at what is life, what's the beginning of life, what is the value of life, it's going to reach out on these different tendrils. And a lot has changed, because you may be thinking, okay, the topic of abortion, all right, we're in Alabama. Currently, as the law stands, although it's being pushed against right now, is that there's an outright ban on abortion. So that includes reason that cannot abort for incest, rape, but then you do have some medical reasons that it can happen. There's some exclusions on that. But a lot has also changed in the law about how we treat human embryos. So that's going to relate not just to contraception, but reproductive technologies as well, and people who are dealing with infertility. And so actually the landscape is changing a lot just on this one topic. Roe versus Wade was overturned. That was initiated in 1973, was overturned in 2022. But that still put some things in the hands of the states, and we'll deal with laws in just a moment. But I want to put this on you for a little bit. When you think about the topic of abortion, you'll see that we've got some different views that are presented in this handout. But I want to turn it on you. What is usually discussed when it comes to the topic of abortion? We'll hold contraception over to the side, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. But what are the various views? What are people contending with this? Do you hear anybody discuss it at all? Some of you shaking your head.
A lot of women have a right to their, to choose what they do with their body.
Okay, so women have a right to choose what they do with their own body. All right. So that then holds that a baby, or what is in the womb, all right, let's just say what is in the womb is a part of the woman, or is the woman. So her making a decision about maintaining the pregnancy or eliminating the pregnancy, that's a health condition. It's her own body that she's making a decision for. Okay, so that's one view that sits there. Okay, we'll let them kind of sit out, and then we'll bring some solutions to them as much as we can. All right, what else is being discussed?
There are people who believe that the baby or embryo within the mother's womb is not yet a life form.
Okay. All right, so what is that thing that's within the mother's womb? Okay, is it just a clump of cells? If it is a baby, when does it become a baby? Is there a certain point that you can say, aha, that's what it is? Didn't know what it was prior, but now that I know, that's what it is. How far does it have to develop to get to that point? Okay, so yeah, that's going to be the thing is, all right, what do you call it? And when do you call it a baby? Okay, and when is it not a baby? When is it a human? When is it not a human? Because a big part of this discussion is going to be about personhood. When does that thing inside of the woman become a person? Because humans get human rights, okay? Okay, so we'll hold that one out there as well. What is it, and when does it become something else? All right, what else is being discussed?
Just taking that a step farther, talking about when does it become a human, then you kind of have to get into the idea of when does it have a soul.
Okay. Because we're not looking at it from a naturalistic worldview that says, you know, humans are just a bunch of atoms colliding around together and that's what you see is what you get. We say, no, humans have a component within us, a soul that makes us different. And that soul is eternal. And it has eternal components to it, and it comes from God and will go back to God. And so it's more than just dealing with flesh. We're not made of just flesh and blood. We're made of something spiritual. Okay, so good. We have the spiritual ramifications behind this that we're, that we have a God part that's involved. Okay. What else is being discussed?
It's being almost promoted, I feel like, in a sense that people are so okay with the idea of abortion that, like, if anybody needs one, there's now people that are, like, going across state lines to help transport people to, like, have an abortion.
Yeah, there's almost this era of recruiting, if you want to call it that. I know to the furthest
Sanctuary states.
Yeah, sanctuary states that I know California kind of being the figurehead of that. They're recruiting people to come over that calling themselves sanctuary states.
Yeah.
You come here, and we've looked at some different laws. I know in some of our different classes where California has a very open point where almost to the point of birth. If it is for medical reasons, one of those medical reasons is the woman's mental health, and that's another nuance of this is going to get discussed. So yeah, there's promoting like, hey, this is what you need to do, which seems odd. Something doesn't quite sit right with that. Anything else that's discussed with it? Are those just views that you see people dialoguing with on social media and a TikTok, or you've got an Instagram reel that's talking about these things, or are you having conversations with somebody about this topic? And if you are actually having a conversation with somebody, what does it look like? So that's when it gets real world, right? When you're sitting across the table from somebody that says, I'm pregnant, and I don't know if I can carry this baby to term. I don't know if I'm ready to be a mother. Those are the hard conversations. And that's where, when we put in all of this foundational legwork to determine how we would respond in a situation, we're doing all of this so not only you have an intellectual response, but you also are able to turn that over into an emotional response that has intellectual backing, where you're sitting across the table from somebody and you're trying to counsel them and minister them through that decision of, you don't need to do this. And I'm not naive, and neither are you. We know the seriousness of a conversation like this. I think this is why it's important to discuss. People come to this topic and you're like, okay, it's just a big social issue and everybody's debating over it. Look, I'm not going to do it. And I know Christians, maybe we even have just a generic policy. I know Christians shouldn't promote something like this. But do we start compromising when we sit across the table from somebody? And it increases even more. And this is something that it's kind of related to contraception, and I'm going to talk about more than just contraception. I'm going to talk about reproductive technology as well. I think it comes into play because we had to experience this when we're sitting across the table, because we had tried to have a baby for a year or more and couldn't, so we decided to go to an infertility clinic. And sitting across the table from somebody saying, okay, how far are you wanting to go with these procedures or with these things in order for Shelby, for you guys to get pregnant? What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? And if things aren't going well, do you want to abort? And this is before Roe versus Wade was overturned, when we first started going through this before Kinley. And so the same conversation came up, it was just in a different context. You would have never asked us to abort at any point, but how we handled embryos and how we handled life, because if you're going to come back and we're going to talk about what is the beginning of life, that's going to determine what you do when it comes to things like contraception, but also reproductive technology, how you handle infertility. Because 1 out of 6, the current statistic is right now, 1 out of 6 couples are going to struggle with infertility. I know we struggled with it, and I know there are multiple people in this congregation that did as well and are struggling with it. And these conversations become real world conversations. It's not just about a slip up between a guy and a girl that are dating and they go too far and they end up with a pregnancy. This is also real world. In a monogamous marriage, trying to decide what do you do and how do you handle these situations. So they become real world, okay? And that's why we want to talk about this, and we're willing to go over 2 weeks so that we can really flesh it out as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of life is really where this lesson lies. I think as we originally started doing this, and you were way back when that started, but you know, we started about the idea of abortion, but then the more we talked about it, the more we studied, the more we kind of discussed it, it really became a discussion about respecting the beginning of life. Does that make sense? Because, and then that opens up a whole other world of discussion. That's what happened with us, is it went from us thinking, okay, we're going to do a lesson on abortion, to what about contraception? Because we start thinking about the sanctity of life. And in vitro, we threw that in this lesson years ago now. I mean, this handout was done, I think on my computer, the last save date was 2016, I think. So that's how long this has been. And in vitro, you'll see there's a little call out in the inside about in vitro fertilization. And now today, as of last month, Alabama made headlines around the world because the Supreme Court of Alabama determined that embryos were to be considered as humans with respect to the way the laws would apply with regard to someone suing because a fertility clinic, or they allowed someone to go in there and some of the embryos were dropped and were killed. And so it's amazing to kind of think about how it has progressed in the last 5 years, even thinking about the beginning of life and how that impacts a lot of different conversations. Does that make sense? It is not confined just to abortion. And I think we need to talk about abortion because obviously we are confronted with that. But I think what we wanted to emphasize more than anything in this lesson is that it's much deeper than just thinking about, you know, are we pro-choice, are we pro-life in life, you know, as a Christian. It's a lot deeper than that because you're starting to respect the beginning of life. And that's why really the subheading of this is, you know, how should Christians view beginning of life issues? Because that's what we're dealing with here. So real quickly, as you think about this, of course, there's some terminology that we want to kind of throw out there because I think it's important to define some things that we are going to use as we go through this. So you think about the terminology that you see, and it's there on your front left of the handout there. Talk about the different definitions of term as we talk about beginning of life issues. Now, there's some other terms maybe that may be thrown in there, but here's some of the main ones, and this is what we are defining them as and what they are defined as. Well, it's not our made-up definition by any means. But fertilization is a term that means the process of combining the male gamete or the sperm with the female gamete or the ovum. And the product of fertilization is a cell called a zygote. We know it as being an embryo, a fertilized embryo. A zygote is an embryo, but fertilization is the beginning of, or when the sperm and the egg join together. And I'm not going to get into a big science conversation about all that, but that's the term fertilization. The term abortion, as we will use it, and as you think about it being used, is the premature exit of the products of conception, meaning the fetus, fetal membranes, and placenta from the uterus. So this term, as you think about in this study, can be what we would call an intentional abortion, one that means that someone actually did something intentionally to cause that abortion, to terminate the pregnancy early. There also are some that we would say would be incidental or natural abortions. And that would be where the body decides, hey, this needs to end. And I say the body decides, but I mean, what happens is we know that that's called miscarriages. That would be still, and in some respect, considered a natural abortion because your body naturally aborts that baby because something has happened. And again, we all speculate, we all wonder. It takes an emotional toll. I don't know if any of y'all have families that have experienced miscarriages or friends that have gone through that. It takes a toll on someone, a massive toll, to think that you had this baby and this baby is gone, this baby died. But again, the term abortion is used, and you got to be careful when you're studying this, kind of, because some scientists will use the term of abortion to also characterize those natural things that occur in the body. But the term abortion itself is just that premature exit. And so obviously it can be intentional or natural. Contraception, and so we'll deal with this later on in this lesson. If we don't get to it this week, we'll talk about it next week. But the idea of contraception is synonymous with what we usually call birth control, but it's any method of birth control that seeks to prevent pregnancy. So it's a pretty broad term when you think of contraception. And so, quite literally, it means trying to go against conception, trying to prevent conception, trying to seek to prevent pregnancy from occurring. And in real essence, you could probably say it seeks to stop fertilization to some extent. Now, as we get into contraception, there's going to be some discussion really as to whether or not these different ways and methodologies of contraception are really meant to stop fertilization or maybe implantation. So that's going to be another word. I don't have that one actually defined here for you, but implantation is where you have a fertilized egg, being a zygote or being an embryo that actually implants or is able to actually connect to the mother in the womb, in the uterus, the uterine wall, well, or elsewhere. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that too when you have a tubal pregnancy. But, you know, you have implantation where that fertilized egg is connecting to the mother in hopes of continuing formation. So again, that would be implantation. Insemination is the procedure in which a fine catheter or a tube is inserted through the cervix into the uterus to deposit the sperm sample directly inside the woman, inside the uterus. And again, the purpose behind this procedure called insemination is to try and do and achieve fertilization and pregnancy. We talk about artificial insemination. You know, probably heard that term before, right? So again, artificial insemination is going to be where you actually are maybe inseminating in an unnatural way. In fact, IVF would be probably one of those things because it is an artificial way to inseminate. You're doing it in an outside the uterus, but you're doing it in purpose a way to fertilize that egg. And viability is a term tossed around. You'll hear it a lot when you deal with abortion, is that people talk about whether the baby is viable. What does viable mean? It means it's a capable, that fetus, that baby is capable to survive and live outside of the uterus on their own. And so that would be what viability means.
All right, so now that we've got a little bit of a foundation, we got some terms that we can use, and we can speak as adults here. I want to ask you, it's kind of opening up, but I think we can sift through it as well. When it comes to this topic, where do you see the biggest issues? Not what people are saying, we've already laid that out. But if we are going to discuss this in-house in a Bible class like this, and kind of knowing where we each come from to some respect, what questions come to your mind on this topic? What are some issues that you face or struggle with? And we can share ours when we get to them as well. But I want to know for y'all, because it'll kind of help us craft where we go with this discussion as well. What issues do you see with this topic?
Sometimes having the baby could affect the health of the mother. Say the mother has a life-threatening illness, and the baby is affecting that as well. So.
Yeah. So that's a hard one, right? Because there are there are a number of things, and I'll say this, when we talk about that, and I think even our, like our medical shows, they capitalize on that kind of thing, like saving the mother's life or the baby. It's a lot more rare than what people want to promote on that when you start looking them up. Now, there's some serious ones that we need to consider. One of them, like he's talking about, a tubal pregnancy or an ectopic pregnancy, which is where the embryo implants within the fallopian tube of the woman, okay? And there are a couple of different versions of that, but essentially if that happens and the embryo begins to grow, that tube can rupture, and it is it's connected to a major artery, and the woman will die because of it. And so that actually needs to be removed, and so she loses control of one of her ovaries because of the surgery that goes along with that. But that is catastrophic. And so that is one thing to think of. There are a lot of other ones though, because of maybe somebody that was pregnant that had high blood pressure or eclampsia, right? Preeclampsia. Is that's really dangerous, but a lot of times that comes later on in a pregnancy where you're past the point of viability where the baby can survive outside the womb. And so it is life-threatening, but there's also a solution that's granted with it as well. But here's the thing, even when you're facing those, does that change the stance of whether that is a life in the womb that we are losing, or is that just because it didn't implant or because it wasn't going to continue growing that it's no longer a person? Because when it comes to us looking at this topic, regardless of where, and this is kind of where you go in the reproductive technology and contraception, is regardless of where the embryo is, that's a human. whether it's in the dish, in the womb, or in the room. Okay, it's consistent between them. So it does present an issue there. But if we can establish what is life, then we'll see how to treat even horrible situations like that. And I say horrible because it's like we're losing life here. But if we don't do anything, you're going to lose 2 lives. Which one is viable and which one's not? And we're not saying that it changes it. It's just it results in a death right there.
If you get I had a cousin who caught COVID while she was pregnant with her son, and he was getting to the point where he could be delivered, but she had gotten so bad off so quick that it was either they could have the baby and put her through surgery to have a C-section, have the baby out, with the chance of her surviving, or it has the chance of her killing her. So if you're in that situation where you could save 1 life, or you take both, which one do you do? Do you say that her life is less important because he's a baby, or stuff like that?
Well, I mean, to me, that's always a question. What if we're both dangling from the cliff? We're both lives, right? Well, what do you just cut the rope on one or not? I mean, the bottom. I equate that because of this idea of when is life. And if we start thinking that we can selectively choose which one because maybe they're smaller or maybe they don't have such of a chance, then I think what you're doing is you're prioritizing one life over another. That becomes the question. If you can try to save both lives, wouldn't you do that? I mean, that would be what I would always argue, is that, if there is a possibility to be able to save both of them, why not try that possibility? If you're going to say, forget the baby, I want to live, we've got some deeper issues, I believe. To some extent. You're getting to some deeper heart issues. I'm not sure, are we talking about moral issues? Maybe that too. But the whole point is that if we have 2 lives that can survive, and we've got the technology, and that's the thing, with regard to the question of saving a life, when you have, the technology today is so phenomenal with regard to some of those things that I think that it makes that not as good an argument as maybe it was 20 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago, when you're talking about someone, all of a sudden having preeclampsia. It's like, if you don't deliver that baby now, the baby's gonna die and the mama's gonna die. And so it's like all of a sudden you've got this huge dilemma. Well, today you don't, because you have the technology that has allowed us to help subside the symptoms maybe for the mother and allow the child to come to terms. So you don't have I don't think it's solid of an argument with regard to that. You do have always that dilemma as to what do you do with something whenever there's not a good choice. What do we do in life when we don't have a good choice? Have y'all ever experienced that? I mean, sometimes maybe there's not a right choice. Maybe there's just a right for the moment, or a right in that situation kind of a choice. And so, you've got to somewhat, I think, sometimes make the call. But I think a lot of times we speak in hypotheticals so much like that. Now, what happened in that situation? Do you know what ultimately happened?
Yeah, so they said, hey, you can have surgery. They were like, it's 90% chance that you're going to die in surgery, but there's a 10% chance you live and the baby lives.
Right.
And she had the surgery and she lived and the baby lived.
Okay. So, I mean, and there you've got, I think, ultimately what any loving parent would make a choice to make. Does that make sense? You make that tough choice in hopes that tough choice is going to bring about the best solution in the end for both.
You have to make risky decisions.
In life.
In life. To participate in creating life, and I use procreation in that respect, that I think that God has given us a responsibility to help create life, is that there's risk that's involved. Emotional risk as well as physical risk. Having gone through multiple miscarriages and all the issues that about our family, we took some risk being involved in all of this, but I wouldn't go back and make any other changes. It was worth the risk, and I'm speaking on Shelby's behalf as well, because we regularly talk about this. There are just dangers that are involved, but we take daily risk anyways, just living in this world outside the garden. And that's part of it. You flip over, we're here in Genesis 1, you look at Genesis 3, life outside the garden stinks. You have increased pain in childbearing. You have, by the sweat of our brow, you have the ground bringing forth thorns. It's rough outside the garden. It doesn't mean that life's going to be easy, and you come across some really difficult situations, but like what Cherry's saying that you don't always know what's going to happen. In doctors, as much as we put our stock in them, they are not God. They are not prophets, and they will admit.
There's a reason they call it practicing medicine, by the way. I mean, that's not. It is not an exact science. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. How many diagnoses have you heard that then were something else? I could give you a whole test. I give you a whole group of them just with my son that were not true. They didn't come to fruition. They didn't know. So even with that, you're gonna have to respond to it. You're gonna have to make split-second decisions, but you need to know going in, what are we dealing with? All right. So what else comes to your mind with this topic, question-wise? What makes this a dilemma or an issue? Is it just medical situations? That's the one that you struggle with the most?
I think the only other one is probably rape.
Okay. What about that one?
I really don't know how to explain it. So.
I think it's more like that. I heard people talk about it before, and they say, why would we want to make a woman who was raped have to carry the abuser's kid the rest of her life as like a constant memory of what happened? So people are like, well, you should let her get rid of it because you don't want to have to negatively impact her the rest of her life having to look at her as abuser's kid every day.
What is y'all's response to that?
That's her child.
Okay.
That's not just the rapist child, that's her child, too.
That's a good point.
It's a blessing out of a terrible situation.
Could be.
A lot of, like we were just talking about earlier, there's a lot of people who have trouble having birth with kids, but you know, if she is able to have birth with a kid, even though it's a terrible situation, then like, you know, even if she doesn't want to have that burden and have to have that memory of what happened, you know, it's not a perfect situation, but if you could decide not to abort the child, but to send it to an adoption center, there are people who would love to have that child.
I think from even my point of view a little bit, but more of a worldly point of view, then it's sometimes not as easy to say it's a blessing. Other cases of abortion don't have sex. That's the best birth control. You chose to have sex, you might have to deal with the punishment if that's how they kind of view it of having a child. That person didn't even choose to have sex, and so they didn't even choose to go through that. So it's a little harder than, I guess, it's not as straightforward because it comes into what we talked about in class of why do bad things happen to people, morality and things like that. So
I think one thing would be healing a traumatic experience is not usually done by another traumatic experience. And I haven't done a ton of study on this, but in the little bit that I have, it seems like abortions themselves are usually traumatic for all involved, doctor and mother having the abortion. And so, I guess that would just be a factor of not even like how you see the child. Like if you wanted to look at it in a more selfish way, it's like whether you care about the child or not, it's still a traumatic experience.
For you, right.
Yeah, especially on the further you go in the development of the baby.
Right, because I mean, the way we would frame it, and even some of these things that you are saying, absolutely, once again, remember, sitting across the table from somebody having this conversation, you have to be tactful in how you approach these things. You wouldn't want to just come out and say, well, two wrongs don't make a right. That's not the way, but you also are saying, this was, traumatic, and I'm sorry that this happened. But taking the life of another individual because of that situation it can't justify it.
Nor will it help it go away. I mean, I worked with a lot of victims, and even catching the bad guy doesn't make it go away. Does that make sense? I mean, there's the solution is not, and I think that's what we got to get through our minds so that we can convey that to somebody else. Like Billy's saying, it's not an easy conversation to have because they've been personally afflicted by that rapist, and then now they're carrying a child. And so you're like, how do I discuss or how do I talk about this in a rational way? I think it always goes back to what is the foundation of life? And if you think about the joy of life, if you think about the blessings that you have in life, and try to convey that. Again, it may not come across to someone who's been a victim of rape. Don't get me wrong. I'm not delusional to think that, oh, they're just going to be all happy-go-lucky and fine. No, that's not the case. But if we go back to that basic foundation of respect for the sanctity of life, and the idea that there is joy and there is love when it comes to the giving of life by God, then our whole mindset kind of changes. Does that make sense? I mean, it really does. If you really start thinking about all those things that we struggle with trying to provide an answer, sometimes kind of answer themselves if we can get to that point, which I think is why we're trying so far to try and hit the idea of the foundation and the goodness that life is from God. It's a blessing. It is a good thing. Because when you do that, and you think about that, you focus on that good thing versus maybe the negative thing that has hit you in your life.
Because what we end up doing is using our scenarios as the filter versus using the principle as the filter for our scenarios. If we can lay a solid case biblically from God's perspective about the beginning of life, the treatment of life, then you will use that as the filter. And it doesn't matter what scenario you come across in life, that's going to be the consistent thing you have to hold to. And so that's why, and we're going to let this carry over, we're going to talk about it now too, is when does life begin, all right? That's vitally important for every single part of this we've discussed. If, what's in the woman, is that a child or is it not? When somebody has to make a medical decision, are they taking a life or are they not? Are you bringing life into this world? And so that's what it all comes down to. And whether our world wants to use terms like personhood or we want to just talk about the beginning of life.
And again, as a Christian, our view on the beginning of life has kind of an extra little oomph to it, doesn't it? We're not just talking about a body functioning, right? Grant, what did you bring up a minute ago?
The soul of the body.
The soul, the spirit, the soul, whatever term you want to call it, that is given to those who have life. And so I always think about kind of in the reverse way for one of the verses I like to think about is James chapter 2, verse 26. Y'all look at that real quick because to me, that's one that kind of helps me understand that close connection that we have with regard to our spiritual part that God has blessed us with regard to our physical part that God has also given us. So if you see verse 26, chapter 2, verse 26, what does it say? Anybody got it there?
For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead.
Okay. Now, we love to use the latter part of that verse, right? Faith without works is dead. Again, very valid, decent argument, yes. That's not what we're talking about tonight, though, okay? I want to talk about the first part of that verse. Because the first part of that verse says, just as the body without the spirit is dead. So here you got the concept here. We're talking about when does life begin. When does life end?
The spirit leaves.
When the spirit leaves, the body is dead. And so that's kind of a concept there. Now you think about it in reverse. When are we alive? When do we have life? And that's when we're blessed with the Spirit. And so that's kind of the extra little oomph, I think, for us to kind of think about as Christians of how important this conversation really begins, because it is really the essence, not just beginning of life, as in we're animated or we have the ability, we have the potential for, life. It's the idea that we have been then blessed with the Spirit of God. And that's kind of why it matters a little bit more, because God has literally breathed into us His Spirit at that point in time. And so I always think of James chapter 2, verse 26 when I start thinking about the beginning of life, because it kind of coincides with the end of life. Our spirit is there hand in hand with our body.
Flip back to Genesis 2. Got to be back there. If we went too far into the Bible, got to go back. Just to reiterate that point, when God, we kind of get in Genesis 2 to get the creation story from man's perspective, essentially. It becomes the central focus there. Somebody read Genesis 2, verse 7.
The Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The man became a living creature.
So God forms man from dirt. But what makes it go from just dirt to something else? When God breathes life. It comes from Him. There's many passages that we have on this list, starting with Zechariah 12, verse 1, that God is the one that gives the soul, gives the spirit to man. Is that it is flesh, or it is just dirt until it becomes life. And what's unique though is that we're not just producing something dead. We're not just, and I'm even talking about individual, when you're talking about the sperm and you're talking about the egg, those are living things, aren't they? They are animated because they come from us. That's why we get to have a part of this process as well, is that I think in the forming, when you have those two things coming together, that life is present. When you have, at conception, is when you get a unique set of DNA. You get a complete set of DNA, the genetic makeup of a human. You can determine hair color, extent of understanding the height that they will develop into. You can know certain things, preconditions of what the person is going to be like. And as it continues to develop, that's the thing, is that's when life starts, but it continues to develop. It doesn't turn into something else. That will always be a baby, and it will always produce a baby. I mean, it will always produce a human from that. And so you can see heartbeat starting very early on, as soon as 3 weeks after fertilization. Brain waves are detected early on. And then you get all the organs that are producing, that you have a human, even from the very beginning, that it doesn't have the potential to turn into something else. It will always develop into a human. And so, kind of getting in a little bit more of when does life begin, we've got a few passages that guys will come back to next week of understanding how the Bible has been showing us this, and even human just interactions. We've known this for a long time, what's in the womb, that this is a human. And if that is the case, and we know that's where God brings in the Spirit, then it's going to matter how we treat it. And it doesn't matter its location. That's why reproductive technology and things are going to come in, and y'all talk about contraception as well. But you start seeing that at conception, you get the beginning of life.
We'll leave you with this. We gotta get the auditorium, guys. But here, Psalm 139, verses 13, and well, it's through 16 really, but I'm just thinking, starting at verse 13. For you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give you thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. The Bible has multiple scriptures. So what I challenge you this week, you got some time, do some scripture searching, talking about the beginning of life, okay? Because once you come back, be ready to discuss that next week, not only as we kind of tag and go off of what abortion means, but more specifically thinking about contraception. And should we as Christians use contraception? First question. And two, if the answer is yes, what kind of contraception? Does it matter? What kind of contraception that we do use? Does that affect with regard to us as Christians and the beginning of life? And be ready to maybe think about that a little deeper than you may have thought about it before. Appreciate y'all's attention tonight. We'll see you next week.
Not next week.
Sorry, 2 weeks.
You're into-
That's right. We got a week off. I forgot about that. You got 2 weeks to study this.
Are you going to have a class in here at all next Wednesday for those that are here?
Doubtful, but I'll post some stuff.
Okay.
When's next week?
Get on the Insta and find out. Oh, Jamboree shirt. I forgot.
Hey, we won't be here the week after that either.
Why?
Well, some people might be, but council meeting.
Oh, campus gospel meeting. We
I
could
mean, that's up to y'all.
we could postpone our conversation if there's going to be some on campus, but that's up to y'all. Nate, you talk amongst yourself and find out. Job 3, I think helps me. It talks there that Job talks about that he was a boy when he was conceived. I think that's very intriguing to me. To that